Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me well. Super. So indeed, so the idea was also to come back to you also today to bring, let's say, an update on where we are with the setup of this union list of critical medicine. So in the next slide, we have some sort of an outline of what we wanted to basically bring to you. So the idea is, if you could go to the next one, so present to you just a bit of context and the timelines for the setup of the EU list. Again, some of you may be already very much familiarized also with the concept of this particular project because this is something that already started in 2021, and we'll go through the details in a second. Also, we wanted just to basically explain, and we believe that's also important to scope and contextualize how basically these lists places itself also across all the existing lists, and we know this is also often something that can create some confusion. So we hope that we're also able to clarify that. Third, and also the plan is to sort of present to you very high level methodology. So what's the criteria, the application of the risk matrix, and how we're going to go about for the setup of the U-list through the regulatory network. And finally, we'll conclude with, let's say, again, a high-level presentation and update on the process to release the list on a staggered manner, and also where we're going to be when it comes to the next steps. So the next slide, again, is just, again, an outlook of some of the important milestones that led to the official development of the list. So in the next slide, you can see that this is basically progressing. So yeah, thank you. So this is currently progressing under the HMA EMA Joint Task Force on Availability. So some of you may be very much aware about the existence of this group. So this is a policy group that has been set up since 16 and is looking into strategic aspects on supply and availability. And this is a group that's been out there in the network for a long period, and one of the various deliverables include also guidance, as Inge mentioned before, but also the workshop that we held with multiple stakeholders earlier this year. So that task has been sent to the Task Force on Availability by the Commission, and we have now in August started initially the rollout of the list. Now, that rollout is basically founded on a methodology that has been agreed also in June. So in June, the task force finalized that methodology, but also the process to create the list. And this is mostly based on a methodology that was developed during the European Commission Structure Dialogue Initiative in 2021. So again, patients and also healthcare professionals organizations were involved also on that initial methodology drafting that was finally, after 2 years, refined by the task force before we set up the EU list. Now, there's obviously also a political interest behind the EU list development. This is also something that is a key priority for Commissioner Kyriakides, who also in April has committed to the setup of an initial version of the list by the end of this year, as Rosa also mentioned initially. So another important element is the fact that there's also, let's say, a strong request also at ministerial level. So I don't know if you're familiarized with a non-paper that has been initiated by Belgium. So member states are currently really pushing also for the setup of this EU list of critical medicines, and that gather a lot of support through the national health ministers during the May 2023 EBSCO meeting. So if we could go to the next slide, again, this is just to highlight a bit better and to clarify better the purpose of the setup of the list. So you can see here that one of the main goals is to really try to ensure that medicines that are critical for healthcare systems are available at all times, and this is applying for all EU and DA countries. So ultimately, this list will catalog medicines that have a significant impact on public health, and from there will activate measures that should be able to strengthen the supply and ensure continuity of care for patients. So a lot of these measures are currently already described in the draft proposal for the regulation, so that's already identified, but will only come into effect at a later stage. But they are mostly around activating industrial capacity and industrial support, whenever we come across particular medicine supply chain vulnerabilities or dependencies. So I just code here also some of the, let's say, measures or security of supply measures that are described in the current draft proposal for the regulation. So those target mainly industry, and one of them is, for example, the diversification of suppliers and also inventory management. So again, something that's already early described in the draft proposal for the regulation, but again, measures that will only come into effect when the revised regulation becomes applicable. So in the next slide, again, as I mentioned at the start, we wanted to help you visualize also the existence of this new list and also how it differs from other existing crisis lists. So we'll start from what we have on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, you have basically those lists that can actually be deployed in crisis preparedness, but also in crisis management activities by both the EMA and ERA. So these are, again, crisis-driven lists that can be activated in a context of crisis in light of the mandates of both EMA and ERA. And very often they activate, let's say, reporting obligations either for industry or for member states. And this is, for example, what we had with both Mpox and COVID-19 list of critical medicines. So that trigger a lot of actions for both, again, member states and national competent authorities in particular, but also for industry when it comes to supply and demand monitoring. So a lot of those actions are very much, let's say, a reactive monitoring based on publication of those lists for crisis events. Now, on your left-hand side, you got the U list, and again, this is something that we will build up for peacetime, and it's very much about proactive monitoring. So again, this will catalog medicines that are deemed the most critical for healthcare systems and that need to be available for healthcare systems at all times. And most importantly, and going before, they really we hope that really helps us putting into a position whereby we can trigger proactive but also preemptive monitoring in peacetime that can help us prevent shortages in EU and EA. And again, that again will enable a lot of measures again that can be triggered when the regulation becomes applicable. We go to the next slide, and this is basically, again, very quick understanding of the methodology. So we try to simplify this just to show to you that member states will be categorizing medicines basically in three groups. So you see those color-coded on the screen. So critical medicines, at-risk medicines, and also other medicines. And this is basically founded on a risk classification that basically is built on two criteria. So that's criterion 1, therapeutic indication, and criterion 2, availability of alternatives. And from there, member states, either through the national competent authorities or through ministries of health or other relevant departments in the member states, they will have to apply there are various risk levels again that were defined in that same draft methodology that we initially built in 2021. So in the next slide, you see basically that application of a risk matrix. So again, the categorization of medicines based on those two criteria that I mentioned, that again, individual countries based on the risk matrix that you see on screen and applied to the various individual medicines will be basically will be sort of the basis for the setup of the EU-wide list. Now, what I wanted to mention to you is also another important element, and this is linked to the assessment of supply chain vulnerabilities. Now, that work will also be factor into the assessment of our EU list of critical medicines, but this is something that's not currently being developed at the level of the HMA-EMA task force. This is some work that's currently being undertaken at the level of the Commission. So DG Agro is also looking into that drafting of a methodology to identify supply chain vulnerabilities and again map and identify those. Again, this will be subject obviously to continuous review. So even if we start already categorize the methodology itself, and that we also will make available when we publish the first version of the list, this is something that's again subject to further testing and that can be further fine-tuned while we start releasing the first versions of the list. On the next slide, we bring to you basically the process to establish the list. So we wanted also to highlight to you how we plan to go about its release. So it will be a staggered release. And on the first phase, that again, we hope to get the first version ready for publication before the end of this year. We are availing and building up on national lists of critical medicines that are already published or do exist, or that are in already very advanced stages for publication. So these are mostly lists that again follow the methodology that has been again adopted by the Task Force on Availability, and from where baseline we are asking member states to start categorizing medicines that are critical in the EU. So again, taking at face value what member states already did and building on that experience that they already have, and from there invite all the EU countries to categorize medicines as critical and come up with the first initial version before the end of the year. So that's phase one. Phase two is something we are planning to start soon after the end of phase one, obviously. So this will be us, the network, prioritizing the review of therapeutic groups of major interest, and will be a review that focuses again on pharmacological groups of high importance, and will be an exercise that will lead in light of the workload that's going to trigger also from the regulatory network, given the larger volumes of medicines that have to be reviewed, will be something that will lead to multiple releases during 2024. Now, to highlight that it is obviously a tremendous effort and a joint work that all the 27 experts that we have in the NCs, but also in the ministries are currently supporting. So it's obviously the success of the development of this list is very much building on that capacity and the velocity of member states assisting the project. Now, we wanted just to update you on where we are with the various phases, because that's also important. So that phase one that you see on screen, and I mentioned to you before, has already been launched on the 1st of August. So we have invited member states to review and complete the first batch of medicines to categorize criticality by 15th of September. So that deadline has just passed. And again, that comprise around 100 INNs that member states had to review, and that categorization is already complete. Now we have also a second batch for review, and that encompasses around 500 INNs, and that second batch is due for review by mid-October. So then approximately 600 INNs that all the member states around approximately 3 months will have to categorize, and from there coming up with an initial version. The very good news, and after having gone through the first, let's say, batch of products reviewed by member states, is the fact that we have 28 countries that again have engaged and completed that first review, and again put us in a position to commit to and be in sort of aligned with those timelines that we initially planned for publication. So that's also rather reassuring. Now, the EU list of critical medicines is going to be also a living document, obviously. So I will be looking into a possible review of maintenance that we have initially deployed for our crisis lists that we released last year. So this is already bringing me to the last slide. And if we could go to that one again, just to update you and to conclude that obviously the development of the list has already formally started in August. And again, as I mentioned to you, the member states are currently over 3 months completing the review before the release of that first version of the list. Now we are engaging, and we want obviously to keep you informed about the progress, and we hope to be again in November with you to provide you, let's say, with more visibility and overview of what that list and what that initial version of the list may contain. So we have to come back to you again in November during the November meeting with more information around the communication strategy, but also with overview of those products that will be present in the list. So the details of phase one I covered. So again, the release of that first version to be again building on the experience that member states had with their national lists of critical medicines, and again, us having started with a EU categorization exercise that builds very much on that experience from the member states and the clinical knowledge from the clinical expert team. So that first version will already be available before the end of the year. And also finally, again, the consideration around the maintenance and the possible review through the future. So I hope these Liam. I'm obviously happy to take any questions and stop for now. So over to you, Rosa. Thanks.